Good afternoon. I guess it could be morning where some of you are, but wanted to welcome you to NACDA's Navigating the Rise of Sports Betting on Your Campus and Beyond. My name is Samantha Hughey, and I serve as the Executive Vice President of Collegiate Athletics at RealResponse. And I am honored to be moderating what promises to be an informative webinar today. I am joined by a dynamic panel of domain experts, each of whom brings a unique perspective to this conversation. But before I introduce the panelists, a couple of housekeeping items. We hope to have a few minutes at the end of the conversation to allow for Q&A from the audience. You will be able to send your questions in via the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. Keep an eye on that Q&A for helpful instructions from Kara at NACDA. Just in case we don't have time at the end, we'll follow up with those answers to the questions to the group. So let's get started with brief introductions. Ross Bjork was named the Director of Athletics at Texas A&M in 2019. With more than 25 years of sports administration experience, Ross has built an impressive career highlighted by academic excellence, enhancing the student-athlete experience, and consistent competitive success. Ross is a very respected leader on the national landscape, having served on several NCAA and conference committees, and currently serves on the board of directors for NACDA. Erin Leifer joined the Fanatics betting and gaming team in February of this year. Prior to joining FBG, Erin spent 6 years at the Federal Bureau of Investigation, supporting the Integrity in Sport and Gaming program, working in partnership with sport leagues, governing bodies, and international law enforcement entities to identify, combat, and disrupt criminal activities impacting sports. In her current role, Erin manages incident reporting, internal investigations, and FBG's relationships with external integrity monitoring services. Aaron Taylor, or as we will call him today, AT, is a CBS sports analyst, college football Hall of Famer, and Super Bowl champion. Aaron was one of the first high-profile athletes to debunk the myths and stigmas associated with mental health in his widely publicized NCAA Mind, Body, and Sport article. Game Face isn't the only face. In the article and in numerous events around the country, Erin reveals some of the hidden obstacles as well as opportunities that most people face as it relates to brain and mind health. Erin believes that everyone on the planet deserves access to resources that promote emotional well-being and peace of mind. So let's get started. We're going to set the stage to begin with. We know there are lots of changes surrounding legalized gambling on sports in recent years. So I'm going to ask the panelists that in each of your respective roles, please speak to this as we start. And I'm going to start with Erin Leifer. Erin, if you would speak about the current laws and regulations regarding sports betting and your current role.
Absolutely. So the legal landscape as it relates to sports betting can be a little bit challenging to understand and navigate. And that's largely because each state has their own regulations and rules. And as we know, sports gambling is legal in certain states and not all states. So it's sort of a challenging landscape to always wrap your head around and understand, which is why, we at Fanatics Betting and Gaming are focused on posting and having all of the most up-to-date and reliable resources available so the consumers can understand what's legal where they're located, what is not legal where they're located, and we're only offering legal and permissible markets in the states where it's able to do so.
Thank you. Hey, Ross, so just yesterday, the NCAA President Baker, in his testimony in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee, spoke about the concern of sports betting and a need for education as well as a common sense approach. How are you and your peers on campuses across the country managing this new landscape?
Thank you, Samantha, for hosting this, and I'm glad you're doing well and on track to being healthy. So we appreciate your leadership in the space of college athletics. And this is no doubt an evolving topic that we've all been facing. I would say the last 5 to 6 years. In my previous role as the athletic director at Ole Miss, a state law was adopted in the state of Mississippi where sports betting was legal, but it was bricks and mortar. And there was about 9 different casinos. And I remember working with the State Gaming Association on basically having triggers around when somebody entered a facility. Well, things have evolved where now it's all technology based. And I think when us in college athletics that have been around a little while, when we think of sports betting, we think of the alleyway bookie point shaving incidents, right? Maybe somebody had connections to the mafia. I mean, those incidents happened 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago in college athletics. Now it's all technology driven and technology based. And so the great thing about, I think, the gaming industry is it's the most regulated, if not one of the most regulated industries in all of the United States. And so we have a lot of tools. And so I think a sensible approach that the NCAA is taking around the enforcement piece and maybe the penalties around student athletes, and then the regulation of the technology, I think, is where we are today. And I think our job is to stay at the forefront of it as, leaders in college athletics.
Thanks, Ross, and thanks for your well wishes. Erin, so as a former college and pro athlete, someone who now is regularly in front of athletes and in your role as an analyst, what are your thoughts about this, just in general?
Man, there's a lot coming at these kids. Back in 2004, I found myself in Sri Lanka about 30 days after the world's largest natural disaster in modern history. And like a lot of people, I didn't know why I was there. I just knew I had to go. And while I was there, I learned that there wasn't just a wave, that there were multiple waves, and that most of the damage was caused when the water receded because it took everything with it. So that tsunami that hit on the natural disaster side is what I equate, the analogy I use, as to what's coming down the pipe for these student athletes and young people in general, all of us, if you will, from a mental health standpoint. So the key is to get ourselves to high ground. And if we don't, we're going to have more casualties than we want. And that's really the context and the framework with which I look at this subject matter. It's another piece of a much bigger puzzle that puts young people in positions that they've got to navigate that people like me and my age just simply didn't have to do. Part of my background comes from the recovery world. I come from a family of alcoholics. I've been, clean and sober for 2+ decades. And alcohol was my ism. For some people, it's sex. Some people, it's shopping. Some people, it's power, money. For some people, it's gambling. We have people on our crew that go when we do a game in Las Vegas and can't get out of the airport because they're pulling on the handle. That's the trigger that gets hit for them that releases the dopamine and they get hooked. I don't have that. But I've sat enough and talked to enough people to understand that it's one of the many avenues of negative coping strategies that people can use to detach or to lessen the negative lived experience that they're having. So as I view this, it's again a piece of a much bigger puzzle that has a tremendous amount of pressure on young people that are ill-equipped to be able to deal with what's taking place. So as we go on, I'll talk about what some of those things are, but I think it's one more thing, one more temptation that student athletes have to deal with. So I think it's great that we're having these conversations so we can share some best practices and really focus on the solutions on how we could administer the best support and improve as many outcomes as we can.
Thank you. Thanks for all of that, y'all. So want to go to something that is on everyone's mind, I think, especially those folks who are on campus and are in leadership roles, and that's integrity, which is whether it's integrity of the game or, around gambling. So I want to start with tools, and I think I'll throw this first to Ross. So Ross, speak about what tools can and are being utilized to ensure integrity in your department on campus, and specifically around, I've heard a lot about technology. I mean, you spoke to that to begin with, and technology is where a lot of betting is taking place. So can you talk about the things that you all are using and your peers might be using so that others can learn about them?
No, I appreciate that. And technology, like I said, I think gambling, gaming, sports betting is, Erin Leifer can probably speak to this better than me as far as regulation. It's highly, highly regulated, and the gaming industry wants this to be done the right way. Clearly, those of us in college athletics, we want to protect the integrity of our games, the purity of the games. The outcome is not predetermined. We want it to play out on the field, on the court, those sort of things. And then to AT's point, we're calling him AT, right? Erin Taylor's point about the pressure that these young people are under. We want to make sure that they're not subject to unscrupulous actors, things like that. And so here in Texas, sports betting is not legal. So if somebody is on an app, if somebody's engaged in sports betting, they're doing so illegally here in the state of Texas. So we have two things. One is just now rolling out. It's through U.S. Integrity, called Prohibit. So prohibition on betting, right? And the idea is that all of our student athletes, all of our coaches, all of our staff members, student managers, anybody that's in our database, if you will, we can enter their name into this system. And that if they go to log in to an online gaming app or website and they try to place a bet, it'll get flagged. And that bet will not be allowed to take place. That is new technology that is just now unfolding. It's not fully deployed yet. That's a relationship that we have through our SEC colleagues in U.S. Integrity. And so to me, that's a game changer. If you follow the Iowa State situations, those were pings that were discovered from facilities through technology. And so we need to be at the forefront of this. We need to, again, protect the student athletes. There's a lot of pressure. So how do we do that? Through technology. The other thing that we have, and this is a plug to RealResponse, Samantha, is that we have the athlete alert system that somebody can go on RealResponse. They can submit a tip, something anonymously. That's the great thing about RealResponse, is it's all anonymous. And then that can be turned over to U.S. Integrity. There can be some follow-up. So those are the tools that are in place right now. I mean, I wouldn't say we have a magic formula. We're probably doing very similar things from an education and monitoring standpoint. But because this is all tech-based, to me, that's the key to this whole thing and how we can prevent it, but also follow up if there is an issue on the enforcement side.
That's great. Thank you for that. So yes, Erin Leifer, your turn now. Not only what are the things that folks can do, what tools can be used, but more specifically, can you talk about the risks associated with legalized gambling and how can they be mitigated? And I would invite this from you, Ross, to the athlete, to the institutions, to the game.
Sure. So Ross did a great job talking about these integrity monitoring services, and there's various individual companies in the space, but the key for us at Fanatics is it goes beyond just a basic requirement relationship. Like my background at the FBI, I see the value in coordination and cooperation in these sort of spaces. So we're really dedicated to having a mutually beneficial relationship with these integrity monitoring services. So as much information as we can give them, as well as taking the information that they give us and really making sure that we're actioning it and doing it to make sports a safer place. We want the wagering environment to be a safer place, and we want to make sure that prohibited individuals, whether it be from an RG perspective or a state legality perspective or a institution rules perspective, are not using our application to wager illegally or against the rules within their organization. So we really strongly believe in collaboration across the board and that space. So to answer your second question, as it kind of relates to the issues of legalized gambling, it's really very nuanced because we kind of have three buckets of thought, right? There's a state-by-state legality issue. So you may be in a state where gambling is illegal regardless. However, you may be in a state where gambling is legal, but your individual employer or school prohibits you from doing so. And then there's obviously the third and final piece, which is using a legalized gambling application, but doing so responsibly, which is obviously at the forefront of all of the sportsbook and operators' perspectives. So we really want to focus on informing across all three boards. So making sure individuals know if they're living or working in a space where gambling is legal, making sure that they're aware of being able to differentiate between a legalized website versus an illegal website and understanding the risks associated with an illegal website versus a legal site. Secondly, when it comes to individual restrictions from an employer or an organization, working to ensure that there's clear communication and we have a way of working with those partners to see if anything is happening that shouldn't be, that we can flag it and address it as quickly as possible before an issue grows further. And then lastly, in a legal and approved state, providing appropriate and robust RG resources so that anyone that is legally allowed to use our platform is doing so safely and has the resources available so that they can be informed and educated in their decision making.
Ross, can you talk a little bit, or even AT as well, but what do you see as are risks to an institution or to the game itself or to the student athlete?
I think just gaming and sports betting is really normalized now, right? I mean, it's talked about, you know, we have betting lines that scroll across the ticker on all the channels, right? ESPN Bet is now going to be a platform that is, you know, rolling out there, and luckily we've been briefed on that through the SEC, and they're going to have strict parameters around, you know, how ESPN approaches, you know, that platform. To me, the biggest thing is somebody going to fix a game for their self benefit or the benefit of somebody else? And then also the prop betting is so big right now. So maybe a player doesn't want to throw the game, right, and affect the outcome, but hey, look, I'm just gonna miss this free throw, right? Because it's the first one of the game, and I did a prop bet that I'm gonna miss the first free throw that I take, you know, something like that. So I think the individual prop bet aspect of it, to me, poses the biggest risk in terms of our athletes being susceptible. Hey, this is no big deal. This won't impact the outcome. It's just one play. It's just one little free throw. Those are the kind of things I think have the biggest, you know, risk potential within our space of protecting the integrity of the games.
I'm going to jump in and a follow-up question to that. How do you address that? How do you educate your student athletes and talk to them, given that it is normalized now?
Education, and just constant awareness and constant, the real response piece. We send out something once a month to all of our athletes for the whole platform, so they constantly hear about it. We have team meetings all the time where we talk about sports betting when there's the NCAA tournament, the Super Bowl, all the big events that are, you know, highly, you know, bet on. We always make sure that there's an awareness going out. And the scary part is, and Erin Taylor can speak to this, is what are the athletes doing on their own time? Who's DMing them? Who's reaching out to them? You know, who's, you know, really creating an atmosphere where, gosh, this might be worth it. You know, no one's going to find out because it's kind of tucked away. And then if it goes bad, then the pressure that they have to fulfill that obligation. So that's the scary part that we honestly just don't know enough about. We don't know what we don't know. Kind of that famous line.
Hey,
and yeah, I would. And Ross brings up great points. And that's the double-edged sword of technology, right? It makes things easier, which makes access easier. But I think when you look at the vulnerabilities, it's not necessarily the star quarterback. It can be the fringe person, the third string backup offensive lineman that doesn't have an NIL deal, maybe sees some of his friends that do and feels that pressure. We talked about SEC regulation, like insider trading for stocks. I don't place the trade, but maybe I give information to somebody else to place the trade. Maybe that on my moral, you know, hierarchy isn't really that bad because I'm not throwing the game, but I'm just giving somebody information that could be helpful, and maybe I get a kickback from that. I think another area of significant vulnerability are the collectives. They're an arm's length away from the athletic department. They often have relationships with the players. Legally, in the states where gambling is allowed, technically they can place bets. They're privy to information that maybe others don't have that could be actionable and therefore profitable. So because of the commingling, if you will, almost the AAUification of what we're seeing on the collegiate landscape, I think those are penetration points of vulnerability that a backup player that may not be starting doesn't have NIL money, or the player who's still connected very much to a university but is stuck in the transfer portal and can't get out. I think that's a really significant place to keep our eye on, because that player still is privy to all the information, still has relationships with student athletes, at least on one campus, if not multiple campuses. That person who's on his way out may be at a high risk to be susceptible to somebody saying, hey, I ain't asking you to do nothing, but if you could help me out with a little information, maybe I could help you out. And then that starts the slippery slope of bad decision making.
Well, you answered one of my questions that I was going to have, or what type of risks are emerging that we may not even be thinking about, and you certainly hit several of those. Before we move on from this theme, Erin, Leifer, or Ross, any further thoughts on it?
Sure, Erin did a great job summarizing it, but just kind of going back on the financial element of it, there's obviously a concern related to the protection and overall wealth that a college athlete has compared to a professional athlete. Obviously, the volume of college athletes is much higher than professional athletes, but also it's not the same financial situation, potential security situation that a professional athlete might have. So that's obviously a larger vulnerability that needs to be considered. And because of Fanatics' role in all things sports ecosystem, that's really something that's important, is like making sure that we can help both keep these individuals safe, but as Ross mentioned, keep them informed because of the vulnerabilities that Erin mentioned. NIL, I call it, like, the 3-letter word. There's, an unintended and intended impacts that we're going to continue to learn and have to evolve around. So it's our responsibility as sort of forward thinkers and leaders in this space to make sure that we are balancing out the positive benefits of NIL with responding to the potentially negative, unforeseen ramifications that might have on students or athletes, just to make sure that everyone remains protected and represented. And that's the most important thing from start to finish.
Excellent point. So moving on, we've talked a lot about the student athlete. We've also talked about the pro space, and I want to talk about that at some point as well. But talking about the student athlete experience, I mean, we've all heard the horror stories of student athletes being harassed and even threatened regarding the outcome of a game. Ross, you brought this up about missing a free throw. Student athletes who, in the course of simply playing this game that they love, may make or miss a shot that impacts the spread. Ross, you spoke about what comes across the ticker in some of the pregame stuff. And I know watching it this year, I was a little surprised at that, because gone are the days when we used to send a paper notice about don't bet on it, right? So, with sports betting getting more and more attention, how do we help these student athletes and athletes in general? Because I think it happens in the pros as well, especially with rookies. How do we help them navigate the pressure it puts on them? And incidentally, the impact on their mental health. So I don't know who wants to take that one first, but I think it's something that we all want to hear about.
I'll jump in.
I'll chime in
Yeah,
on
go ahead. Go ahead.
the
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
You
okay. There's recreational use of drugs and alcohol and having fun and being a college student, and then there's the addictive properties of it as well. So I believe that looking at this through the lens and saving space for the possibility that it's not just disposable income and kids having fun and trying to make a little bit of money, that there could be compulsive behaviors that are associated with this is something that could be helpful. I think having culturally relevant information and speaking specifically to different demographics in the Black and brown community who shooting dice or playing dominoes is something that you grew up with in backyard parties and is, seemingly normal. I've been on airplanes in the NFL where guys are fist fighting in the back because somebody, played cards differently in a game and a game check was on the line. So this is a dynamic that I've seen from top to bottom in every which different way. The mental health component is a key component. I didn't use drugs and alcohol the way that I did because the way it made me feel. I used them because the way it prevented me from feeling. I wanted to numb myself out. So when there's ancillary pressures and anxieties and people are being very vocal about a catch I made or didn't make, that adds to my own level of discomfort. So I want to seek refuge from that. For a select population of student athlete, they may get their fix by wagering and playing games of chance and those certain things. So I've been really encouraged by what's taking place on the mental health side in, intercollegiate athletics and this entire enterprise. It's improving. It's not where it needs to be. I think we all know that. I think we're working to get there. I believe that gambling in that piece should be underneath that umbrella of not just mental health, but mental well-being. What are we doing holistically for our student athletes so they have less of a need to enact and act in the ways that aren't efficient mechanisms to get them to the outcomes that they want. And I think zooming out and looking at the bigger framework and including this as part of that existing and ongoing conversation would be thoughtful, smart, and pragmatic, really.
To me, the best thing we can do is really listen and learn from our athletes, whether that's, small groups, whether that's large team meetings, ask them questions. The RealResponse platform, to go back to plugging your company, Samantha, I think is a great tool that we utilize here to get, real-time data from, again, anonymously. We bring in, guest speakers. We had a gentleman talk to our football team about how he basically was in the mafia and infiltrated, that whole society and what he learned from that and how he overcame being at risk. And I mean, those kind of story, we have to story tell, we have to listen, we have to learn, we have to show them examples. The scared straight aspect of it, I think is still a part of sort of the team aspect in sports of, hey, these are the lessons learned from people that didn't do it the right way. And you could be this person and showing, those aspects and those examples as well. I wish there was a way. I've heard US Integrity talk about, and maybe Erin can speak to this on the technology side. I wish there was a way to really combat the social media outreach. I don't know how to solve that piece where these young people get barraged with, I can't believe you cost me this amount of money because you dropped that pass or missed that shot. If we could control that and have some accountability for our society, that would be nice. I don't know if we can solve that. And again, that's the scary part of the mental health side of this. The good thing is we've never talked more about mental health than we do today. We have more resources than we've ever had, but it's still not enough. And I predict that we'll have as many athletic mental health specialists as we do athletic trainers someday. We're not there yet, but someday I think there'll be a very similar ratio to help with all of these aspects.
Erin, Leifer, can you talk about, and I've had conversations with Matt at USI and hearing some of the work that they do in response to some of those threats and how they deal with them on behalf of folks. But if you also, Erin, could talk about what are those tools that are out there? How can we, to Ross's point, ensure that we may not be able to stop it from incoming, but maybe we can, and how do we address, what tools and agencies and are out there, whether it's the State Gaming Commission or what have you. If you can speak up a little bit about that for our audience, that'd be helpful.
Sure. And I saw there was a question sort of similarly in the chat. So if this addresses that, great. But a big concern for me, especially when I was sitting in a different seat, would be like just the volume of potential things that are coming in on a social media site, and like that something might not even get recognized that could be a valid threat or concern to a player. And then secondly, which was mentioned earlier, the fact that especially on a college campus, right, folks know where they live, they know where they practice, they know where they eat. So there's a lot of security concerns that are unique when you think about the college landscape and things like social media threats against athletes. I think the most important piece, which was mentioned earlier, and it's going to look different on a campus by campus, is just education and resources. So I don't think that there's a one size fits all model for every single campus, but having a process or a resource in place for when an athlete sees an area or something that is concerning or threatening to them, that they know and they have a person that they can go to and report that information. From there, how a campus chooses to build that out with local law enforcement, federal law enforcement, state regulators, there's a variety of different approaches, but I really feel strongly that building out a process that the entire collegiate community is aware of and feels comfortable with is really critical, because the worst thing that we would want to see is that they don't know where to go when something is concerning, and that would create a larger issue. So I know a lot of campuses are doing great things in that space, and it has to do with the bigger picture of athlete advocacy and the mental health piece that everyone's mentioning. And I would encourage individual institutions to continue to do so. And I'm always available to sort of share my unsolicited opinion on what makes the most sense and, where we've seen success and, what might work best for college students on campus. I mean, I think the most important thing we want to remember is Some of these athletes are young adults. So we have to remember to treat them as such and provide them with the resources and education to be successful.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really helpful sitting here as I think about my time on campus and knowing that there are folks like you, Erin, who are out there and are willing to be a resource and to help us in our desire to educate these young people. So thank you for that. So moving on. Do you think there could be an upside to sports betting in college sports? Like, here's an opportunity, are there opportunities that an athletic department could look at and lean into? Is there a potential to access revenue related to sports betting? I don't know. It's kind of out of the box thinking, but Ross, what do you think about that?
Well, we've seen some examples that got rolled out pretty aggressively at some other institutions, and it appears that those got rolled back. And I don't know if that was the institution that did that or the gaming industry itself. Again, here in Texas, we don't have any bricks and mortar gaming operations. Sports betting is not legalized. So it's much different. Upsides, potentially, the transparency of this whole sports betting issue, I think, can be an emphasis that we can all take seriously. And how do you partner on that education with a gaming entity, right? I mean, we all see the responsible drinking ads that our alcohol partners put out there. Could you partner with a gaming industry on responsible, legalized sports betting, perhaps? The sharing of data. There's several conferences, the SEC is not one of them, but several conferences have data agreements where these gaming companies are getting real-time stats that are fed through their systems instead of, all of our stadiums have somebody in our stadiums and they're sending stats to the gaming industry. They're in our stadiums right now. So can you make that official sort of aggregation? That could be a positivity. Again, the regulation piece of this, what I've learned is that it's more regulated than anything. And so can you capitalize on that for awareness, education, monitoring? To me, those are the positive pieces of the integrity and making sure that we protect our athletes in our games.
That's brilliant. Anyone else have a thought on that?
I live in Southern California, and we have some of the most expensive gas in the country. And a big reason why is because it's heavily taxed, and those revenues get distributed to do other things in California. And I'll be the first to admit, we need a lot of help out west. I'm wondering if this new bucket of found money that clearly is in a growth cycle, that we could siphon off a portion of that to maybe provide what Ross was talking about very smartly, and having mental health practitioners that are equitable to what it is we do to treat our physical injuries. The reality is an improved mindset leads to improved performance, which means you play better, which means you win more games, which means everybody's making more money, which is good for the entire enterprise of what's taking place. But if I've got a torn ACL and I point to the MRI, I can see where it's torn and I know what to fix. And I've got trainers, a dedicated staff that can help me get back onto the field as quickly as I can. But with the invisible injuries, the ones of emotion, of trauma, of lived experience, we don't have the same resources, where the data suggests strongly that the negative impact on performance is commensurate with what takes place when you have orthopedic injuries. So my offering and suggestion would be, and I don't know the legalities and the politics either intra-conference or within on the state level, but let's siphon off some of these revenues that are going to continue to grow as this sport grows, and use that as a funding vehicle to provide the umbrella from a global perspective to help our student athletes improve their brain and mind health.
Yeah, I think that's, that we've looked at that from a lot of different ways at a national level, I think, as well. So it was really a question just to think about, outside the box. We may not have an actual answer for it, but having ideas around it could move us in a direction that could be really positive. So one last question I'm going to ask, not last question of this, but last question under the potential positives in sports betting. Erin, Leifer, what's next, do you think, in sports betting? I mean, we've seen Fanatics started a sports book. How does it grow in a legal, positive, and responsible way?
Great, thanks for that. I like that question, obviously. Like you mentioned, sports betting is new and dynamic, and we're also new and dynamic. So we know there's going to be changes in the months and the years ahead, whether it be laws or regulations, consumer behavior. And the main thing is that we're really committed to holding ourselves above the standard of excellence because of the fact that we work with athletes in so many different dimensions and not just in the gambling space. And we're going to continue to do that. So that's something we're really looking forward to. Another thing to look ahead towards is a lot more collaboration across the board from the different legalized sportsbook operators. I think we all have a lot that we can learn from each other, whether it be best practices or education and information. And I've really enjoyed that component of my role, is having the opportunity to learn from others. And I'm looking forward to continuing to do so. And then lastly, like the collaboration with some of the third-party entities, like we mentioned, the integrity monitoring services or the campuses and organizations. I think there's a lot of really positive opportunities for working together, learning from each other, leveraging our skills, and really being united in the messaging, which is we are committed to creating a space, a safe, legal space to gamble, and whatever we can do to make this space as safe and as many resources available as possible, we're going to do that. And I think that's exciting, is that's kind of a shared attitude within our business and hopefully across the industry. So that's something to look forward to, even while we're navigating the challenges of changing rules and regulations and new states entering the market. Despite the challenges, it comes with so many exciting opportunities to just raise the bar and be committed to good business practices, business collaboration, and overall working towards a common goal.
That's great. Thank you. So I want to shift now to, gambling on pro sports and leagues is ahead of obviously gambling on the college level, and wondering if we can learn in a way. We often hear and that say the lines are beginning to blur. Some would say they already have blurred between collegiate and professional athletics. College sports are playing a bit of a catch up to the pro sports in that sports betting world and may not have the same level of resources. So what do we do, and what can we learn from them? Erin, Leifer, we'll start with you.
Sure. So I think that kind of alludes really well to what I said previously, which is sort of like learning from, each other. And I think what we can really emphasize is the importance of information sharing. Obviously, all of these regulations for different organizations are very nuanced, and we're extremely open to ingesting information from different leagues, organizations, teams on what their requirements, what their rules are, and doing our very best to, monitor that behavior and keep those individuals from using our app and sportsbook moving forward. So I think that the information sharing that's happening at a professional level, and also just some of the education strategies that have been helpful, and candidly some of the education strategies that have failed, we can learn a lot from those as well and sort of implement those as best practices moving forward. Now, the problem, as I mentioned earlier, is just a volume game. It's a lot more individuals that we're working with, which is why I think like learning from not only the successes of professional sports, but also the failures and where there's been struggles is a really good opportunity to learn and leverage that moving forward.
So I'm going to ask AT this. AT, when you were in the pros, especially as a rookie and rookie camp, and the education you got during that, and then, what do you see that worked well for you all as pro athletes, knowing that this was a potential, with sports betting on the NFL? What are some things that you saw that worked well? What are some things that if you had the ability to wave a magic wand that you might do differently, both for the pros and in college for athletes and what they're facing?
Yeah, I might date myself a little bit, but it was pretty black and white when I played. There was no gray area. And I think that's what the challenge is moving forward, is that it was a no-no, it was a taboo, and we knew that. And there was a negative stigma around it. And I think the players that participated in any of those sorts of things were very few and far between, and were much more likely to do other things than impact the outcome on the field with their profession. So that's the unique challenge that we have now. And I think we've seen that in the NFL as well, in some certain circumstances where, there's some hard and fast rules. You can't gamble from the facility. You can't gamble on your own sport. But all these other things, where do those fall? Maybe this is okay, if not necessarily legally, morally. And an idea just floated up, so I'll share it, is Could there be a course that is given that student athletes are mandated or required to take around gambling that would be credit towards their degree or their general education, so that they're getting this information in a responsible way, where they're having talk tracks on what to say, what sort of questions to ask, how to talk to their friends and family members, what those sort of things are. One of the most interesting courses I took at Notre Dame was medical ethics. And on Monday, I'd walk in and euthanasia was bad. And on Wednesday, he'd flip the argument. And I thought, oh my God, euthanasia is the best thing in the world. And then by Friday, we'd have to discuss. I'm like, I have no idea what I think. And it really tested my ability to comprehend and dive deeper into a subject matter. And I don't know how pragmatic or practical that is, but athletes, we all like classes that we're suggested to take because we all need help on that GPA. What if there's a course or curriculum that could maybe kill two birds with one stone as this begins to grow? Is that a potential solution to a situation we know inevitably is probably going to grow and get worse before it gets better?
Erin, you brought up a great point about a course. We actually, in order to compete in athletics here, you have to take a quiz around sports betting. And it has all the NCAA rules in it, talking about you can't bet on, sports that the NCAA sponsors, et cetera. And so that's a great idea. That do you weave that into the, like you said, the sort of the onboarding, the curriculum? Everybody's here. Everybody gets here in the summer, right? I mean, we've got summer access now. That's way more prevalent than it ever was. So we have a quiz. There's no credit for it other than it's just part of our education and our monitoring. So I think that's to me, this is not going away. And what we need to do is be really, really creative about how we educate, how we monitor, and those kind of ideas. I think that's a brilliant idea. We'll have to talk to our provost about, can we give credit for that quiz?
Yeah. Here's a thought too. I mean, we've talked a lot about the student athlete, but what are we doing for those who are in that student athlete's ecosystem? Athletic trainers, coaches, maybe to your point, Erin, how do they talk to their friends if their friends are asking certain questions, or managers, those kind of. Ross, I know that you and I have spoken in the past about some of the education that you all are doing, or your thoughts around the people who are literally seeing those student athletes every day and the information that they have access to.
Well, again, back to the fear of the unknown. How many people touch our programs? Managers, student athletic trainers. I'll give you a real world example. Last year, we were playing a football game. We had some athletes that got sick on Thursday and Friday. I got a call from the SEC through US Integrity that the line on the game had moved. And was there something going on? I said, yeah, we're going to have several people out of the game tomorrow. Don't know exactly who yet, because they're going to wake up tomorrow and see how they feel. But it could be some high impact players. And so somebody had that information, and that information got shared, maybe just innocently, but somehow it triggered a US Integrity alert, which then led to a call to the SEC, which led to a call to us. And there's nothing we could have done about it, right? We don't know if anybody shared information. There were young men that did not play in that game. And so those things are happening right now. And that's the scary part, is we have thousands of people around our programs. And again, an innocent comment may lead to somebody calling somebody who said this person's out, or this person's been in a boot all week and they can't even walk. There's no way they're playing. That's the hard, really, really hard and fast truth about this gambling environment.
Somebody's always watching. So before we are going to have some time for Q&A, it looks like, but I want to give each of our panelists the opportunity for whether it's final thoughts and words or a call to action. This has been incredibly insightful, and I so appreciate it. I know our listeners do as well. So we'll go again, as we did with the introductions, in alphabetical order of last name. So Ross, final thoughts, call to action.
I think we weaved a lot of these things together. I think we have to just partner with technology. We have to partner with the gaming industry, so it's all transparent and we can educate accordingly, and really just protect our games and protect our student athletes. That to me, that's the biggest. That's why we're here ultimately. That's the biggest thing.
Thanks. Erin Leifer.
Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to be here with I feel pretty important being on a call with these two guys and you as well. So thank you. But I just want to reiterate what's been mentioned previously, which is communication and collaboration is going to be the most important thing. And at Fanatics, we're committed to going above and beyond the industry standard and the industry requirements to do that and make sure that we make legalized gambling a safe space and that we provide the resources and information necessary to keep all of athletes, whether it be professionally and college athletes as well, informed and educated. So looking forward to continuing to work together and accomplish that goal.
Thanks, Erin. All right, AT.
All right, I've always felt that it's the job of leadership to kind of define reality, and we're living in a reality that gambling is here to stay. So I would invite us to not keep our heads in the sand, to have open and honest conversations about what comes along with that, and to really ask ourselves, what can we do to holistically support the student athletes on our campus? Also, like, when you have dynamics that are like this, that are complicated, it often requires a comprehensive, robust, and collaborative approach. So I would strongly encourage all of us to continue to cross-pollinate, to share best practices, to work together with all of the partners in that ecosystem so that we can stay ahead of this instead of chasing it and trying to put the fire out after it's begun.
Well said. Okay, so it looks like we do have time for some Q&A. We have about looks like about 12-ish minutes remaining. So looks like we already have some questions. So I am going to turn over the Q&A component, at least to read the questions or take the questions in, to my colleague, Emily Lang from RealResponse. So Emily, if you would select some questions and pose them to the panel, please.
Thank you, Samantha. Yes, this is Emily, your Q&A wizard. And I have one question here that may be best suited for Ross, but it is, do you feel the NCAA would prohibit sponsorships that emphasize gambling? And this could be for anyone.
Yeah, I think I understand the question, meaning would they prohibit universities from engaging in sponsorship activity? I've always been in these kind of categories, a sort of local decision making, that if an institution feels compelled to do that for whatever reason and they can justify it on their campus, I think it'd be really hard for the NCAA to prohibit those kind of sponsorship. And again, I think going the other way, kind of what AT was talking about, the reality's here. So can you actually embrace it where it's a benefit from an education and monitoring standpoint, and not just, oh, we want a bunch of money. And then if you do get money, can you put that money into resources for athletes? So instead of being scared of it, I think we have to embrace this reality because it is here.
Thank you, Ross. I have another question. How do you support and protect our student athletes from threats that they may receive via social media? And at what point do we get law enforcement involved?
Yeah, I'm actually I think, they hit on that a little, Ross definitely hit on that a little bit, but maybe for the campuses that don't have some of the technology in place yet from a USI or otherwise. But I think, Erin Leifer, it would be terrific if you could take this one, and Ross, what your experience was perhaps before you had that.
Sure. So just quickly, and obviously not speaking on behalf of the FBI anymore, but from my experience, I would say, anything that is a direct threat to life is something that law enforcement is going to get involved with, whether it be at a state or a federal level. So it's very important that individuals are aware that, like, what the difference between a threat to life is and a nasty message. And that's not to minimize that nasty messages are hurtful or impactful, but obviously the threat to life piece is where law enforcement would likely get involved. And I guess the best tip I would give to someone that perhaps doesn't have as many resources or as robust of a department as others is, get to know your state and local law enforcement and develop that working relationship, because they are there to help. And this is certainly a space that they are aware of is growing, just like we are on this call. So always encourage making those connections and those relationships, and then they can best sort of advise you on the process and what would be the best way to bring something up to them, and what are the things that are most likely to help build a case for them to action or what wouldn't be. And so I always encourage that collaboration across the universities and police and law enforcement.
Yeah, I know we used, one of the things that we were really at a couple of previous institutions, building a really good relationship with your on-campus law enforcement as well, whether they are for different states and different laws, whether they are deputized by your local law enforcement or not, but they can really be a great conduit as well. I know, not just related to gambling, but when student athletes would receive threats in one way or another, really engaging with them quickly and because they too have the tools, I feel like, and the experience to be able to say that is a real threat, or this is something we will go deal with in a different way. Ross, or I don't know if you have any thoughts related to that.
No, I think that's the key is it goes back to what Erin Leifer said about making sure the athletes know that there's an outlet and there's resources. If they do feel threatened, that they know where to go. That, to me, that's the biggest thing. Are we going to stop it? Can we stop it? I wish there was a way. But once something happens, they feel safe, secure, that somebody's going to follow up, that somebody's going to monitor this moving forward. That's what we have to get to. There's no way to stop it completely, but what happens when there is some action taking? I think that is our responsibility.
And I'll say from a visibility
Inky.
standpoint, on social media, so I call games, and fans are really appreciative of the job I do, and they're quick to let me know at times. And I'm a 50-year-old man that's a college football Hall of Famer, won a Super Bowl ring. I'm gainfully employed, happily married, 3 great kids that are killing it. And I read something from some dude in his basement, and it affects me negatively, my mental well-being. So what I've learned to do over the years is when I call a game, I don't check Twitter or look at any of my messages on my phone for 24 hours. I will also be proactive and text something positive out, not puppies and kittens, but it might as well be, so that fills my timeline up before I go check. So if there are things, it gets pushed down. And as silly as that sounds, as a grown man, that has significantly improved my mental well-being around my games, because it lets it be isolated and I'm not letting those negative images and impressions and messaging come in. And that, again, is underneath the umbrella of mental health best practices and well-being. So all of this stuff is the glue that brings all of the components together. And I think those are some of the simple ways that you can help mitigate it, because we can't stop it. What can we do to improve or lessen it? And another thought was, and I believe Ross said this earlier, is I think a lot of times we sit in the ivory tower, me as a parent as well, and want to solve stuff and throw resources at it. And one of the things I learned in Sri Lanka was I had too many ideas and I didn't ask enough questions for the project I was doing. And since then, the endeavors that have gone the best for me is I reached out to the people that I'm trying to help. What is it that you need? What's hardest for you? If you could wave a magic wand, what sort of things would be available? And I think having their input on what resources they need, what things that they're experiencing, and then with our resources, we go build that for them, takes more time and is more filled with more effort and probably stretches out what that is, but may give us a better chance to hit the bullseye than if we're just trying to solve a problem because we're distracted with what's taking place and watching this pot grow, when it would be in our best interest to be mindful and strategic and grow with that to stay ahead of it versus trailing it. And that's, full
Thanks.
stop.
So I think we have time for one more question, Emily. So if you can pick one from what's remaining, and looking at our time, we've got a few minutes to answer this and then we'll wrap up.
Sounds good. Thank you, Samantha. The last question here that I have is, how does the emergence of artificial intelligence affect sports betting positively and negatively?
Wow. Who would like that one?
I think Erin.
Yeah, Erin Leifer, maybe.
My husband is probably in the other room, like rolling his eyes, like, you should listen to me when I'm talking about artificial intelligence more frequently. I think the key thing that at least I can speak to confidently is that with artificial intelligence, there is going to be a lot of non-verified information that's available to the public on social media and other websites as well. So just to kind of always encourage people, especially when it comes to sports information or gambling resources or anything really in this space, just to kind of make sure you're sourcing from a really reputable place. Not to say that there's not super valuable benefits that AI will likely bring to the space that I am not nearly informed enough to speak to, but I just want to encourage everyone that I've already seen some things that, you know, are dupes or inaccurate information. So just to make sure that you find really reliable resources and sources for information and depend on those, especially as there may be more entries into the space that aren't as necessarily verified or reliable moving forward.
Wow, thank you for that. So I just want to thank our panelists again for taking the time. They all have extremely busy schedules. And this was when we first reached out to a person, they were like, absolutely, it is such a critical need that we have right now in the enterprise of collegiate athletics and beyond. I want to thank all of you for signing up and listening in. And I want to thank NACDA for giving us the opportunity to have this conversation on a wide scale. So with that, I will say thank you and look forward to a continued conversation. Want to say again, appreciate those of you who are in leadership positions in this area and are so committed to the health and well-being of our student athletes across the board. Take care all. Bye-bye.
Thank you.